I missed you.
Me too.
Sausage Party is probably the loudest, most aggressive R-rated cartoon most people have actually seen, and heavy metal is right behind it, dripping with blood and nudity and chaos. If you think animation equals safe family night, you're about to be very wrong. These movies are not cute. They are not harmless. They are not something you throw on while your nephew eats cereal on the carpet. They are messy and loud and sometimes honestly disturbing, and I love that they exist. But no, these are not for kids, not even close. Number 10. Anomalisa. Okay, let us start with something that looks harmless. Soft faces, stop-motion puppets, calm voices. You might glance at it and think this is artsy and slow and probably fine. Nope. Anomalisa is about a lonely middle-aged man who thinks every single person in the world sounds the same. Literally the same voice, same tone, same bland personality. Until he meets one woman who sounds different. That is the hook. That is it. No explosions, no superheroes, just depression. And it hits hard. The movie is quiet, almost too quiet. You sit there and feel uncomfortable because it feels real, painfully real. There is an extended lovemaking scene that is not played for laughs. It is awkward. It is intimate. It is honest in a way that feels almost invasive. This is not cartoon romance with sparkles and music. It is two lonely adults fumbling through connection in a hotel room. And that is exactly why it is not for kids. Kids would be bored first of all. They would not get it. They would not understand why the same voice thing is symbolic. They would not grasp the idea that this guy is projecting his emptiness onto the world. But more importantly, the emotional weight is heavy. It is about mental health, about isolation, about the fear that you will never truly connect with anyone. There is explicit language, there is nudity, there is adult intimacy shown in a way that feels grounded and human, not stylized, not flashy. Just real. And real can be more disturbing than monsters. The film was directed by Charlie Kaufman, and if you know his work, you already expect existential dread. He is not here to entertain your kid. He is here to make you question your own life choices at 2 in the morning. I actually admire this movie a lot. It proves animation is not a genre for children. It is a medium. You can tell stories about heartbreak and self-loathing with puppets just as easily as with live actors. Maybe even more effectively because the artificial look makes the emotions stand out in a strange way. But would I ever recommend this to someone under 18? Absolutely not. There is nothing fun about it. No colorful action. No goofy sidekick. Just a man slowly realizing he cannot escape himself. It is beautiful. It is sad. It is deeply adult. And if someone tells you all cartoons are for kids, show them Anomalisa and watch them sit in silence for 90 minutes. Number 9. Waltz with Bashir, 2008. Now we shift from quiet sadness to war trauma. And this one does not ease you in. It opens with nightmares. Literal nightmares. Wild dogs running through dark streets. Gunfire. Flashbacks that feel broken and incomplete. Waltz with Bashir is not fiction. That is the first thing you need to understand. It is an animated documentary about the Lebanon War. Director Ari Folman is basically investigating his own lost memories from his time as a soldier. The entire film is built around the idea that his brain blocked out something horrific. And he wants to know what. That alone is heavy. The animation style is sharp and surreal. It almost looks cool at first. Clean lines, strong colors, dreamlike sequences. But then the content sinks in. Soldiers firing into cities, civilians caught in chaos, the psychological collapse of young men who were thrown into violence and never processed it. There is no sugarcoating here, no heroic soundtrack telling you how to feel. It is quiet, reflective, and then suddenly brutal. And here is why this is absolutely not for kids. First, the violence is real in context. It may be animated, but it represents real massacres, real bodies, real historical trauma. This is not fantasy war. It is not laser guns. It is not superheroes. It is the slow, crushing realization that people did terrible things and then tried to forget. Second, the emotional weight is crushing. The entire story revolves around guilt and suppressed memory. That is not something a child can process in a healthy way. Even many adults struggle with it. And then comes the ending. I will not spoil it in detail, but the film shifts from animation to actual archival footage. Real footage. It hits like a punch to the chest. It reminds you that this is not a stylized story. It happened. Kids should not be watching war crimes footage. Period. I respect this film deeply. It is powerful. It is important. It proves animation can handle journalism and memory and moral responsibility. But it is not entertainment in the way most people think of animated movies. It is an emotional excavation. There is strong language. There are graphic depictions of violence. There is heavy political context. It asks questions about complicity and accountability that most adults still argue about. If someone sees that it is animated and assumes it is safe, they are making a huge mistake. This is one of those films that lingers in your mind for days, maybe weeks. It is serious, it is mature, it is haunting, and we are just getting started. Number 8. The End of Evangelion, 1997. All right, now we step into full psychological meltdown territory. The End of Evangelion is not just dark, it is overwhelming. It feels like someone took an existential crisis and turned it into a 2-hour animated apocalypse. This film continues and reimagines the ending of the series Neon Genesis Evangelion, and it does not care if you are comfortable. Giant biomechanical beings fight in brutal battles while teenagers pilot them and spiral into emotional collapse. There is blood, there is destruction, there is screaming, and underneath all of that chaos, there is deep depression and self-hatred driving the entire story. The violence is not clean. It is not heroic. Limbs are torn apart, cities are destroyed, characters break mentally before they break physically. It is loud, and then suddenly quiet, and then disturbingly intimate. Why is this not for kids? Let me be blunt. Because it is about trauma and lovemaking duality, and identity, and the fear of existing. There are scenes that are lovemaking-ually explicit in a psychological way that feels invasive and raw. There are moments of mass destruction that are graphic and upsetting. The tone swings from action to philosophical despair without warning. 1 minute, you are watching a giant battle, and the next minute, you are inside a character's fractured mind, listening to them question their worth as a human being. That is not Saturday morning cartoon energy. That is adult psychological drama wearing the skin of anime. Director Hideaki Anno was clearly working through something personal, and it shows. The film dives into themes of loneliness and rejection and the desperate need for connection. It gets abstract, it gets symbolic, it gets messy. You are not meant to sit back and relax. You are meant to feel uncomfortable. You are meant to think. And sometimes you are meant to be disturbed. The final act becomes almost experimental with surreal imagery and intense emotional breakdowns that would completely confuse a child and probably unsettle them in ways they cannot articulate. I actually admire how fearless this movie is. It does not soften its message. It does not try to be accessible. It says, this is pain, and this is what it looks like, and you either confront it or you turn away. But that bravery comes with a warning label. The graphic violence alone would earn its mature status. The love-making content and psychological intensity push it even further into adult territory. If someone tells you anime is just cartoons for teens, show them this film and watch their face change. This is animated art aimed squarely at grown viewers who can handle heavy themes and brutal imagery. Our kids would not just be confused, they would be overwhelmed. And honestly, so are a lot of adults. And trust me, the next entry gets even more extreme. Number 7. Perfect Blue, 1997. Now we go from apocalyptic depression to full psychological horror. And I mean real horror, not jump scares, not cartoon ghosts. I am talking about identity breakdown, obsession, stalking, violence that feels way too real. Perfect Blue does not hold your hand. It drags you into paranoia and then locks the door behind you. The story follows a pop idol who decides to quit singing and become a serious actress. Sounds simple. It is not. The moment she changes careers, her life starts unraveling. A stalker begins watching her. A website appears online documenting her private thoughts as if someone is inside her head. Her new acting role requires disturbing scenes that blur the line between performance and reality. And slowly she stops knowing what is real and what is not. Director Satoshi Kon crafted something razor-sharp here. The editing alone messes with you. Scenes cut without warning. Reality blends with hallucination. You think you understand what happened, and then the movie pulls the rug out. It is unsettling in a very adult way. There are violent attacks that are sudden and brutal. There are scenes of love-making assault depicted within the context of acting that are intentionally disturbing. There is blood. There is panic. There is a constant sense that the main character is losing control of her own mind. Why is this not for kids? Because it deals directly with exploitation and fame and the way society consumes young women. It shows how media can distort identity. It portrays obsession in a frighteningly grounded way. There is no fantasy layer protecting you from the horror. The violence is human. The threat is human. And that makes it far more intense than monsters or aliens. Also, the psychological aspect alone would be too much. The film expects you to track shifting timelines and unreliable narration. It expects you to sit with discomfort. A child would either be confused or deeply unsettled. And honestly, some adults still walk away shaken. I am firmly on the side that this is one of the best animated thrillers ever made. It is smart, it is tight, it predicted online obsession culture before social media even exploded. But it earns its mature status without question. The love-making content is explicit in context. The violence is graphic. The emotional spiral is heavy. If someone ever says animation cannot compete with live-action thrillers, I point them here. Then I warn them. Because once you watch Perfect Blue, you do not just forget it. It lingers. It crawls into your head. And we are not even at the top half yet. Number 6. Akira, 1988. Now we hit a true legend. Akira is the film that made a lot of Western audiences finally realize animation could be violent and political and completely unhinged in the best way. It is loud. It is angry. It is soaked in neon lights and blood, and it absolutely does not belong anywhere near a children's playlist. Set in a dystopian Neo-Tokyo built after a massive explosion, the story follows biker gangs, corrupt officials, military experiments, and teenagers with powers they cannot control. Sounds cool. It is, but it is also savage. There are brutal street fights, graphic shootings, explosions that tear through cities. And then there is Tetsuo. His transformation alone is nightmare fuel. Bones twist, flesh mutates, bodies are crushed. It is not subtle. It is body horror in full force. Director Katsuhiro Otomo did not tone anything down. The animation is gorgeous, but the content is ruthless. You see political corruption. You see government experiments on children. You see riots and social collapse. This is not just violence for shock value. It is chaos built on social commentary. But a kid is not going to process the commentary. They are just going to see people getting ripped apart in ways that feel disturbingly detailed. And let us be honest, the violence here is not quick and sanitized. It lingers. Characters scream. You feel the impact. There are moments where the destruction feels almost overwhelming. Entire city blocks are flattened. The scale is massive and terrifying. Why is this not for kids? Because it combines graphic violence with heavy themes about power and control and rebellion. There is strong language. There are scenes of medical experimentation that are deeply unsettling. And the final act becomes a full-blown cosmic meltdown that borders on existential horror. I am on the side that Akira is a masterpiece. No hesitation. It changed animation history. It inspired countless filmmakers. But if someone thinks it is just a cool motorcycle cartoon, they are in for a shock. This film demands maturity. It demands emotional resilience. A child might think the bikes look awesome. They do. But then the story spirals into mutation and destruction and moral collapse. So that is not kid-friendly. That is adult sci-fi with teeth, and we are climbing higher now. Things are about to get louder and a lot more obscene. Number 5. South Park. Bigger, longer, and uncut. 1999. All right, now we move from bleak sci-fi horror into something that looks goofy and stupid on purpose, and that is exactly why it fooled so many people. You see those simple cutout characters and you think this is harmless. It is not harmless. It is a profanity machine strapped to a musical, and it earned that R rating the hard way. This movie takes the already outrageous TV series and cranks everything up. The language alone is nuclear, kids swearing in creative ways that would make adults blush. Songs that are catchy and absolutely filthy. Jokes that fire so fast you barely recover before the next one hits. But underneath the chaos there is sharp satire about censorship and moral panic, and that is where it gets interesting. Created by Trey Parker and Matt Stone, this film is basically a middle finger to anyone who thought cartoons had to behave. The plot centers around parents blaming Canada for corrupting their children after the boys sneak into an R-rated movie. That irony is deliberate. The entire film mocks the idea that media alone is responsible for bad behavior. It exaggerates the panic until it becomes ridiculous. But let me be clear, this is not subtle adult humor. It is aggressive. There are love-makingable jokes that are explicit. There are graphic cartoon deaths. There is a literal war between the United States and Canada, played for comedy, but filled with blood and explosions. There are songs about hell featuring Satan in a toxic relationship. Yes, that happens. Why is this not for kids? Because even though the characters are children, the humor is aimed straight at adults. The profanity count alone is record-breaking. The lovemaking references are constant. The political satire assumes you understand media outrage culture. A child would either repeat the worst lines at school or sit there confused, while adults laugh at references they do not get. And here is my take. I think this movie is brilliant, it is chaotic, it is loud, it is intentionally offensive in a way that forces you to think about why you are offended. But it is absolutely not safe for younger viewers. It weaponizes crude humor, it pushes boundaries on purpose. It was literally rated R for pervasive vulgar language and graphic violence. The animation style tricks people. It looks cheap and silly. That is part of the joke. But the content is heavy with adult themes about free speech and hypocrisy. And those themes are wrapped in jokes about anatomy and explosive cartoon carnage. If someone ever tells you animation cannot be dangerous, show them this. Just maybe do not play it around your family unless you are ready for very awkward silence or very loud laughter. And we are not even near the top yet. The next films go even further into territory that makes parents very nervous. Number 4. Heavy Metal, 1981. Now we are talking about pure chaos. Heavy metal does not pretend to be wholesome for even 1 second. It opens the door and immediately throws you into a swirl of violence, nudity, sci-fi madness, and rock music blasting at full volume. This is the kind of movie that parents in the early 80s probably walked in on and instantly panicked. It is an anthology film based on the Heavy Metal magazine. That magazine was already known for adult fantasy art and dark science fiction stories. So the film follows that same energy. Multiple segments, different characters, different worlds, but all connected by this glowing green orb of evil that basically corrupts everything it touches. And when I say corrupts, I mean it leads to murder, war, and some very explicit content. There are barbarian warriors slicing enemies in half. There are futuristic cab drivers dealing with alien gangsters. There is a storyline involving a young girl transported to another planet where she becomes a near-naked warrior fighting armies. The animation is detailed and stylish. And the soundtrack is packed with rock legends. It feels rebellious and wild, but it is absolutely not subtle about its adult intentions. The violence is graphic. Limbs are cut, blood sprays. People are shot in ways that linger on impact. And then there is the lovemaking duality. Nudity is frequent, not hinted at, not hidden. Just there. The tone is unapologetic. It does not soften scenes for comfort. It does not explain itself. It just charges forward. Why is this not for kids? Because it combines explicit nudity with brutal violence and adult themes about corruption and power. The characters are often morally gray or outright cruel. There is drug use. There are scenes that feel like they were ripped straight from an underground comic book. A child watching this would not understand the satire or the fantasy influences. They would just see graphic imagery that they are not emotionally equipped to handle. And honestly, even some adults were shocked when this came out. Animation at the time was still widely associated with family entertainment. Heavy metal kicked that assumption in the teeth. It said animation can be raw and adult and messy. I am actually a fan of its boldness. It feels like a time capsule of rebellious creativity. But let us not pretend it is safe. It is soaked in adult content from start to finish. The R rating was not an exaggeration. It was a warning. If someone sees a cool animated warrior on the cover and thinks this is just fantasy fun, they are in for a shock. This movie exists to push boundaries. It revels in being inappropriate. And now we are entering the top 3. Things get even more outrageous from here. Number 3. Fritz the Cat, 1972. Now this one. This is the grandparent of adult animation chaos. Before South Park, before Sausage Party, before most people even imagined cartoons could be dirty. Fritz the Cat walked in and basically set the building on fire. It was the first animated feature to receive an X rating in the United States. Not RX. That alone should tell you everything. Directed by Ralph Bakshi, this film follows Fritz, who is a smooth-talking college student cat drifting through the counterculture scene of the late 1960s and early 70s. And when I say drifting, I mean drugs, lovemaking, political unrest, racial tension, protests, violence, all of it. The animation style looks loose and almost playful. Anthropomorphic animals talking and partying. It almost feels like a Saturday morning cartoon at first glance. That is the trick, because within minutes you are hit with explicit lovemaking content that leaves nothing to the imagination. There are group encounters, graphic nudity, characters using drugs casually. The dialogue is blunt and crude. It is not coy. It is not suggestive. It is direct. And then the satire kicks in. The film mocks radical politics. It mocks shallow activism. It mocks consumer culture. But it does it through chaos, through exaggerated characters who often spiral into violence. There are riots, shootings, scenes of brutal conflict that are not toned down. The tone swings wildly between comedy and shocking brutality. Why is this absolutely not for kids? Because it is built entirely around adult themes. It deals with racial caricature in a way that is intentionally provocative, but deeply uncomfortable. It includes explicit lovemaking scenes. It portrays drug use as casual background activity. It contains violent confrontations that escalate quickly. A child would not understand the political satire. They would just see disturbing imagery and behavior with no context. And here is my take. I respect what Fritz the Cat did historically. It shattered the myth that animation was only for children. It opened doors for adult storytelling in the medium. But it is messy. It is offensive on purpose. It pushes boundaries in ways that still make people uneasy. This was not designed to entertain families. It was designed to provoke adults, to shock them, to make them argue. And it worked. If someone ever claims adult animation is a recent trend, you point to this film. But you also warn them. Because watching it is like stepping into a time capsule of raw counterculture energy with zero filter. We are in the top 3 now, and the next 2 are even more explicit in very different ways. Number 2, The Spine of Night, 2021. Now this one feels like it crawled straight out of a forbidden fantasy book someone hid under their bed. The Spine of Night is modern, but it looks and feels like something from the gritty early days of adult animation. It uses rotoscope animation, which means real actors were filmed and then animated over. The result is eerie. Movements feel slightly too real. Faces feel almost human, but not quite. It creates this uncanny energy that makes every violent moment hit harder. The story centers on dark magic, a mysterious flower that gives immense power. And of course, humans being humans, they abuse that power immediately. Kings seek domination, Sorcerers crave control. Entire civilizations crumble because someone thought they deserved godlike abilities. This is not light fantasy with friendly dragons. This is betrayal, torture, war, mass slaughter. And when I say slaughter, I mean graphic. Heads are crushed, bodies are torn apart. Blood flows freely. The film does not cut away. It lingers. It shows the cost of violence in a way that feels almost medieval in its brutality. There are scenes that would absolutely traumatize a child. Not stylized cartoon violence, not slapstick. Realistic screaming and suffering animated with unsettling detail. There is also explicit lovemaking duality woven into the narrative. Nudity is present. The tone is adult from start to finish, and the themes revolve around corruption and the cyclical nature of power. People rise, they abuse magic, they fall. And in between there is devastation. Why is this not for kids? Because it treats violence and lovemaking duality with zero filter. It does not romanticize heroism, it shows cruelty, it shows how power twists people. A child would not process the moral arc, they would just see brutal imagery that sticks in their head. And honestly, even some adults find it intense. I actually admire how committed it is to its dark tone. It does not apologize. It does not soften edges to reach a broader audience. It feels like a direct descendant of films like Heavy Metal, but even more violent. It proves that adult fantasy animation is alive and well. But let us be clear. This is not the kind of fantasy you put on for background noise while kids play. It demands maturity. It demands emotional resilience. It is heavy and grim and soaked in blood. And now we are at number 1, the loudest, the most aggressively inappropriate animated film most mainstream audiences have seen. And yes, it earned that spot. Number 1, Sausage Party, 2016. This is the one that tricked half the planet. Bright colors, cute, googly-eyed food, a supermarket setting that looks like it belongs in a Pixar trailer. And then 5 minutes in, you realize you have made a terrible mistake if there is a child anywhere near the screen. Sausage Party is not subtle. It is not clever in a quiet way. It is loud and filthy and proud of it. The entire premise revolves around sentient food discovering that humans are not benevolent gods, but violent consumers who will literally rip them apart and eat them. That concept alone gets dark fast. But instead of playing it straight horror, the film piles on nonstop lovemaking jokes and profanity that never lets up. The language is relentless. Every other line feels like it is trying to outdo the previous one in shock value. There are extended conversations about anatomy. There are graphic visual gags involving food products that are absolutely not child-friendly. And then there is the violence. When humans begin cooking and chopping the food characters, it becomes exaggerated, but still grotesque. Limbs are sliced. Characters scream as they are boiled. It is cartoonish, but the intent is clearly to shock and amuse adults. The film also leans heavily into adult satire. It pokes fun at religion and blind faith. The food characters believe they are chosen and will enter a glorious afterlife once purchased. That belief shatters in brutal fashion. The metaphor is obvious. It is about belief systems and harsh reality. A child is not going to unpack that. They are just going to see a sausage-yelling profanity while chaos erupts. And we have to talk about the ending. The final sequence is infamous. It is explicit. It is unapologetic. It is a full-blown adult orgy played entirely for outrageous comedy. There is no way to spin that as family entertainment. None. Why is this absolutely not for kids? Because everything about it is built around adult humor. The jokes are lovemakingual, the violence is graphic. The themes question religion and existence in ways that are intentionally provocative. The R rating was not decorative. It was earned. I will say this, though. I admire the nerve. The marketing made it look like a cute animated adventure, and then it detonated into chaos. It forced people to confront their assumption that animation equals safe. It does not. It never did. Sausage Party stands at number 1 because it reached the widest audience while being aggressively inappropriate from start to finish. It is colorful and energetic and completely unsuitable for children. If someone presses play thinking it is harmless, they are in for a loud, unforgettable shock. And that is the thing about these films. Animation is a tool, not a babysitter, and when it is aimed at adults, it can go very, very far. Animation is not a safety label. It is a storytelling tool, and sometimes that tool cuts deep. These films prove cartoons can be violent, political, and brutally honest. So next time someone says it is just a cartoon, remember this list. Some animated worlds are strictly adults only.